3 wedding rings. 3 identical faces. One devastating truth that changes everything. A marriage that was never real. 3 Korean mafia triplets who claim to love her. One impossible revelation that shatters every promise they made. One innocent African woman. 3 dangerously devoted brothers. A betrayal so complete it rewrites the definition of love and sacrifice. YouTube's algorithm is unpredictable. If you don't hit the subscribe button right now, you might never see our stories again. We can't let that happen because this community survives because of you. Grab your popcorn and let's dive in. The words hit Nia like physical blows. You are the sacrifice for our boss. And for a split second, she thought she'd misheard. Not in the penthouse where she'd learned to call home. Not surrounded by the 3 men who'd sworn to protect her. Not on what she believed was supposed to be their wedding night. But there they stood, Jean, June, and Jay, her husbands of 6 months, their identical faces wearing expressions she'd never seen before. Cold. Resolute. Apologetic in the cruelest way possible. The eldest, Jean, stepped closer, his voice steady despite the tremor in his jaw. Julian Vance requires payment for the territory he's given us. You are that payment. Nia's legs gave out, but June caught her before she hit the marble floor. His hands, the same hands that had held her so tenderly, now felt like shackles. When she looked up, gasping for understanding, she found herself staring into eyes that had once promised her forever. This was always the plan, Jay said from behind her, his voice barely above a whisper. From the moment we chose you. Chose you. Not loved. Not married. Chose. I don't understand, Nia managed, her voice breaking. We're married. You said, you promised. The ceremony was real, Jean interrupted, crouching to her level. Your feelings were real. But the purpose. He reached out to touch her face, then stopped himself. You were always meant for him. The penthouse, their shared home with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul, suddenly felt like a cage. The luxury she'd grown accustomed to, the protection she'd felt, the slow-burning love she thought she'd found with these 3 dangerous, beautiful men, all of it had been an elaborate prison. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why me? Because you're perfect, June said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. Pure. Untouched. Everything he demanded. Jay moved to the window, unable to look at her. Julian Vance doesn't just collect debts, Nia. He collects offerings. Rare ones. The room spun. 6 months of marriage. 6 months of careful courtship, of learning Korean phrases to make them smile, of slowly falling for their different personalities, Jin's protective intensity, June's gentle humor, Jay's quiet intelligence. 6 months of believing she'd found something impossible and beautiful. All of it a lie. When? She asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Tonight, Jean said. He's expecting you within the hour. Nia stood slowly, June's hands falling away from her arms. She looked at each of them, these men who'd shared her bed, her meals, her dreams of a future, and saw the truth she'd been too naive to recognize. You never loved me, she said. It wasn't a question. The silence that followed was answer enough. But then Jay turned from the window, his face a mask of anguish. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. We weren't supposed to. But we did. All 3 of us. And that's what makes this, his voice cracked, that's what makes this hell. The marble floors of the penthouse stretched endlessly before Nia, their cold perfection reflecting the city lights that twinkled 40 stories below. She pressed her bare feet against the polished stone, seeking some warmth that never came, just as she sought understanding in the faces of the 3 men who claimed to love her. The apartment was a masterpiece of modern luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that cost more than most people's homes, art that museums would kill for. Yet every surface felt like ice against her skin, every room an elegant prison cell lined in gold. Damien, Adrian, and Marcus moved through the space like shadows of each other, their identical faces masks of controlled perfection. Sometimes she caught one of them watching her with an intensity that made her stomach clench, but when she turned to meet their gaze, they would smile that practiced smile and look away. They spoke to her in careful, measured tones, as if she might shatter if they raised their voices above a whisper. Their conversations felt scripted, rehearsed, discussions about the weather, about her comfort, about anything except the questions that burned in her throat like acid. She had tried asking about her life before, about the gaps in her memory that yawned like chasms in her mind. The brothers would exchange those quick glances, the silent communication that passed between them faster than lightning. "You were in an accident," they would say, their voices gentle but final. "The doctors said the memories might never return. We're here to take care of you now." But why couldn't she remember the accident? Why did her reflection sometimes feel foreign, like looking at a stranger wearing her face? The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, a diamond so large it seemed obscene, so heavy it made her hand ache. 3 identical proposals, delivered on 3 separate nights, each brother presenting the same ring with the same words, the same rehearsed passion. She had said yes because what else could she say? They were her only connection to a world that felt increasingly unreal, her only anchors in a sea of forgetting. But the wedding was coming, rushing toward her like a freight train she couldn't stop. They had chosen the date, the venue, even her dress, a creation of silk and lace that hung in her closet like a beautiful shroud. When she asked about the ceremony, about which brother would stand at the altar, they smiled and said it would all be perfect, that she needn't worry about such details. The way they spoke about it made her skin crawl, as if the wedding was less a celebration than a transaction, a business deal finally coming to fruition. At night, lying in the enormous bed they had chosen for her, she stared at the ceiling and counted her breaths, trying to quiet the voice in her head that screamed that something was wrong. The brothers never stayed the night. They kissed her forehead and retreated to their own rooms, leaving her alone with her questions and the growing certainty that the life they had built around her was beautiful, perfect, and completely false. The city pulsed beyond the windows, millions of people living their real lives while she existed in this crystalline bubble of lies. Soon, they promised, she would be their wife. Soon, they said, everything would be complete. But as the wedding night drew closer, Nia couldn't shake the feeling that completion would mean something far more sinister than happily ever after. The warehouse smelled of rust and desperation, a fitting backdrop for the conversation that would damn them all. Damien felt his brother's tension like a physical weight pressing against his ribs as Julian Vance emerged from the shadows, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. 20 years of servitude had taught them to recognize that particular smile, the one that meant someone was about to suffer for his amusement. "My loyal dogs," Julian's voice carried the cultured accent of old money and older cruelty. "Still wearing those matching faces I paid so handsomely to create." He circled them slowly, savoring their stillness, their practiced submission. "Tell me, how is our sleeping beauty adjusting to her new accommodations?" Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he knew better than to speak without permission. They all did. The scars hidden beneath their expensive suits served as permanent reminders of what happened to those who forgot their place in Julian's world. 3 identical faces, 3 identical souls bound by blood debt and carefully orchestrated dependency. "She's comfortable," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the revulsion churning in his stomach. "The memory suppression is holding. She suspects nothing about her true identity or the circumstances of her acquisition." Julian's laugh was like broken glass grinding against stone. "Such clinical language, Marcus. You speak as if you didn't spend weeks studying her habits, learning her routines, preparing for the moment my men would snatch her from that pathetic little apartment she called home. Tell me, did any of you feel a twinge of conscience when you delivered her to my chemists?" The silence stretched between them like a blade. They had been 5 years old when Julian found them in the gutter, 3 starving waifs whose only crime was existing without his permission. He had fed them, clothed them, educated them, and in return, carved away every piece of humanity that might have interfered with their usefulness. They were his creatures, molded and shaped for whatever purpose amused him. But somewhere in the darkness of their engineered souls, something had gone wrong. They had looked at Nia sleeping helplessly in that medical facility and felt something Julian had tried to burn out of them years ago. The wedding is in 3 days, Julian continued, examining his manicured nails with theatrical disinterest. Have you explained to her the unique nature of your arrangement? That she will be bride to all 3 of you simultaneously? His eyes glittered with malicious delight. I do so enjoy the look of confusion on her face in the surveillance footage. Such a delicate flower, trying so hard to make sense of a situation designed to be incomprehensible. Damien's hands clenched into fists before he forced them to relax. She will comply. The conditioning ensures it. Oh, I have no doubt she will comply, Julian purred. But compliance isn't what I'm after. I want her broken, gentlemen. Shattered beyond repair. You see, her father thought he could steal from me and disappear into witness protection. He thought geography could save his precious daughter from paying his debts. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was wrong. The triplets stood motionless as Julian outlined the final phase of his revenge, how they would destroy Nia's spirit on her wedding night, how they would ensure she understood that love was nothing but another weapon in his arsenal. Each word felt like acid on their tongues, but they nodded and agreed because they had no choice. They belonged to him, body and soul, and soon they would deliver Nia's destruction with their own hands. The revelation crashed over Nia like ice water, stealing her breath and shattering the last fragments of the beautiful lie she had been living. She staggered backward until the cold marble walls stopped her retreat, her mind reeling as the truth arranged itself into a pattern too horrific to accept. The 3 men she had trusted, the faces she had grown to love despite everything feeling wrong, they were her captors, her jailers, her executioners. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the thundering of her own heartbeat. This isn't real. This can't be real. But their identical expressions of tortured resignation told her everything she needed to know. The wedding dress hanging in the closet wasn't a symbol of love, it was a burial shroud designed to look beautiful. Her eyes found Marcus first, always the gentlest of the 3, the one who brought her tea when she couldn't sleep and spoke to her in softer tones than his brothers. If there was any humanity left in this nightmare, it would be found in him. She moved toward him on unsteady legs, her hands reaching out like a drowning woman grasping for salvation. Marcus, please, she breathed, her fingers catching the fabric of his shirt. You don't have to do this. I can see it in your eyes, you don't want this. We can leave, all of us. We can disappear somewhere he'll never find us. Her voice cracked with desperation. I know you care about me. I've seen it when you think I'm not looking. For one devastating moment, Marcus's carefully constructed mask slipped. She saw the agony there, the self-hatred that ate at him like cancer, the love he had tried so hard to kill but couldn't quite destroy. His hand moved as if to touch her face, to offer some small comfort in the darkness closing around them both. She's right, brother, Adrian's voice cut through the moment like a blade, cold and precise. You do care. We all do. And that's exactly why Julian chose us for this particular task. He stepped closer, his presence radiating controlled menace. Did you think our feelings were an accident? He's been watching us for weeks, studying how we look at her, how we flinch when she smiles. Our attachment to her isn't a weakness to be exploited, it's the weapon he's using to destroy us both. Damien moved to flank her other side, trapping her between them. Every moment of tenderness you've seen has been real, Nia. Every gentle touch, every careful word, it all comes from our hearts. And that's what makes this so perfect. His voice carried the weight of absolute defeat. He owns us completely. Our love for you isn't our salvation, it's our damnation. And yours. Marcus stepped back, his face closing off once more, any trace of hope extinguished. We belong to him, he said quietly, each word a nail in her coffin. And soon, so will you. The walls of her golden cage collapsed inward, leaving nothing but darkness and the terrible understanding that love, in Julian Vance's world, was just another tool for breaking souls. The penthouse door chimed with deceptive pleasantness, the sound of crystal bells that might have announced afternoon tea rather than damnation. Nia felt the triplets stiffen around her like hunting dogs scenting a predator, their synchronized tension radiating through the air thick enough to choke on. She had never seen them afraid before, not truly afraid, but as footsteps echoed across the marble foyer, something primal and terrified flickered behind their identical masks. The woman who entered moved like liquid mercury, her designer heels clicking a precise rhythm against the floor. She was beautiful in the way that expensive sculptures were beautiful, flawless, cold, and utterly without warmth. Her platinum hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, not a strand out of place despite the October wind that had followed her inside. When she smiled, it was the expression of a shark recognizing blood in the water. "Miss Chen," she said, her voice carrying the hint of an accent Nia couldn't place, something European, refined, and deadly. "I am Vivian Cross. Mr. Vance has sent me to ensure your transition proceeds smoothly." Her pale eyes swept over Nia like a pathologist examining a corpse, cataloging weaknesses and vulnerabilities with professional detachment. Nia pressed closer to Marcus instinctively, seeking some fragment of protection, but he stepped away as if her touch had burned him. All three brothers had retreated into themselves, becoming hollow shells of the men who had just moments ago confessed their helpless love for her. In Vivian's presence, they transformed into nothing more than expensive furniture, present but irrelevant. "The preparations are complete," Damien reported, his voice stripped of all emotion. "She's been conditioned according to specifications. Memory suppression remains stable." Vivian nodded approvingly, circling Nia with predatory grace. "Such a lovely specimen. I can see why her father was so reluctant to surrender her location." She reached out to touch Nia's face with fingers cold as winter glass. "Mr. Vance has such creative plans for you, my dear. 20 years he's waited for this moment, refining his vision, perfecting his methods. You should feel honored to be the centerpiece of his masterwork." The casual cruelty in her tone made Nia's stomach lurch. This woman wasn't just following orders, she was enjoying them, savoring each moment of terror like fine wine. Where the triplets radiated tortured reluctance, Vivian emanated pure, undiluted malice. "The car is waiting downstairs," Vivian continued, producing a small silver case from her purse. "A mild sedative to ensure your cooperation during transport. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness in the elevator." She smiled again, that terrible, empty expression. "Mr. Vance despises scenes in public places." Nia looked desperately at the three men who had claimed to love her, searching for any sign that they might intervene, might choose her over their master's commands. But they stared at the floor like guilty children, their silence more damning than any words could be. In that moment, she understood with crystalline clarity that love, no matter how real, meant nothing when it belonged to broken men serving an unbroken monster. The sedative Vivian had administered left Nia floating in a hazy twilight between consciousness and oblivion, her limbs heavy as lead but her mind sharp enough to catalog every detail of her prison. 3 hours until the final handover, Vivian had announced before departing with that predatory smile. 3 hours to exist in the space between hope and despair while the triplets maintained their vigil like beautiful, broken sentinels. They had retreated to the far side of the living room, speaking in hushed tones that carried just enough for her to catch fragments, security protocols, timeline adjustments, contingency plans. Their voices held the hollow efficiency of men discussing a funeral they were being forced to conduct. She lay on the pristine white sofa where they had positioned her, fighting the pharmaceutical fog that threatened to drag her under completely. That's when she noticed it, a hairline crack in Marcus's facade when he glanced toward the kitchen. His eyes lingered for just a fraction of a second too long on the marble island, and in that microscopic tell, Nia glimpsed possibility. During her weeks of captivity, she had observed their routines with the desperate attention of a trapped animal. Marcus always checked his secure phone after Vivian's visits, always stood in that exact spot by the kitchen island. The sedative made her movements sluggish, but desperation sharpened her focus to a razor's edge. She feigned deeper unconsciousness, letting her breathing slow to match the rhythm of drugged sleep while her ears strained for any shift in their conversation. When Adrian mentioned checking the building's security feeds and Damien moved toward his laptop, she knew this might be her only chance. Rolling off the sofa with exaggerated drowsiness, she stumbled toward the bathroom with the convincing gait of someone barely conscious. The triplets tracked her movement but didn't interfere. After all, where could she go 40 stories above the street? But instead of entering the bathroom, she veered sharply into the kitchen, her fingers desperate as they searched the hidden compartment she had seen Marcus access countless times. The burner phone felt like salvation in her palm, its weight the first real hope she had touched in weeks. Her fingers flew across the screen, muscle memory guiding her to the emergency number she had glimpsed on Marcus's contact list during one of his careless moments. Federal Marshal's office. Her father's handler. Someone who might still care that she existed. Federal Marshal's office, how may I? The voice crackled through the speaker before strong hands closed around her wrists like shackles. Damien's grip was gentle but implacable as he lifted the phone from her nerveless fingers, his expression a mask of professional regret. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and she could hear the truth of it in his voice. "I'm so sorry, Nia." Adrian appeared at her other side, a syringe gleaming in his hand. "A stronger dose," he explained unnecessarily, his words heavy with self-loathing. "Vivian's orders." The needle slid home with practiced precision, and as darkness rushed up to claim her, Nia heard Marcus speaking quietly into his secure phone, "Package secured. No complications. We're ready for final transfer." Hope died with a whisper, not a scream. The estate rose from the mist like something conjured from nightmares, its Gothic spires clawing at the storm-darkened sky. Nia's consciousness flickered back to life in stuttering fragments as the sedan wound through iron gates that closed behind them with the finality of a tomb sealing shut. Her limbs felt disconnected from her body, the sedative still coursing through her veins like liquid lead, but terror had a way of burning through pharmaceutical fog. The great hall stretched before them in impossible dimensions, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with malevolent purpose. Candles provided the only illumination, their flames casting dancing demons across stone walls lined with portraits of men who bore an unsettling resemblance to each other, the same cruel mouth, the same predatory eyes spanning centuries of canvas and oil paint. Julian Vance stood at the far end of the hall beside an altar carved from black obsidian, its surface etched with symbols that hurt to look at directly. He was smaller than she had expected, almost delicate in his expensive suit, but power radiated from him like heat from a forge. When he smiled, she understood why the triplets had looked so afraid. This was not a man who had accumulated wealth and influence, this was something wearing human skin, something that had learned to mimic humanity without ever understanding it. "Welcome to your wedding, my dear," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "Though I suspect the ceremony will be quite different from what you imagined." He gestured to the altar with theatrical flourish. 20 years I've waited for this moment. 20 years since your father thought he could steal from me and hide behind federal protection." The triplets flanked her like honor guards at a state execution, their faces blank masks hiding whatever remained of their souls. She tried to catch Marcus's eye, searching for any flicker of the man who had brought her tea and spoken gentle words, but he stared straight ahead as if she had already ceased to exist. "You see," Julian continued, circling her with predatory grace, "your father's theft was merely the catalyst. What I require from you transcends simple revenge. He traced a finger along the altar's edge, and the carved symbols seemed to pulse with their own dark light. These markings are older than Christianity, older than civilization itself. They speak of power that doesn't age, doesn't die, doesn't surrender to the weak mortality that plagues lesser men. The terrible understanding crashed over her like ice water. This wasn't about money or vengeance or even the twisted satisfaction of destroying an enemy's child. This was about something far more ancient and infinitely more evil, a ritual that would consume her soul to feed his endless hunger for dominion over death itself. As Julian began to chant in a language that predated human speech, Nia made her choice. The silver letter opener on the altar caught the candlelight like a beacon of desperate hope, and she lunged toward it with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. The letter opener found its mark with a wet sound that echoed through the cathedral silence, silver blades sliding between Julian's ribs like a key finding its lock. For one impossible moment, time suspended itself, candle flames frozen mid-flicker, shadows holding their breath, the ancient symbols on the altar pulsing with anticipation. Then Julian Vance looked down at the wound with the mild curiosity of someone examining an interesting insect. How delightfully unexpected, he murmured, his voice unchanged despite the blood blooming across his pristine shirt. He grasped the handle and withdrew the blade with casual ease, as if removing a splinter. The wound sealed itself before Nia's horrified eyes, flesh knitting together without so much as a scar to mark where steel had pierced him. It's been decades since someone managed to surprise me. The triplets surged forward, but Julian raised a hand to halt them, his attention fixed on Nia with newfound interest. Tell me, my dear, what gave you the courage to attempt something so beautifully futile? Surely you must have realized that a man who pursues immortality would have already achieved some measure of it. Nia's mind raced through the fragments of conversation she had overheard, the careful words Vivian had spoken, the way everyone deferred to Julian's authority with religious devotion. Because you're not immortal, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not yet. That's what all this is about, the ritual, the altar, the symbols. You're still just a man playing with forces you don't fully understand. Julian's laugh was like crystal breaking. Clever girl. And what, pray tell, leads you to that conclusion? If you were truly beyond death, you wouldn't need my blood on that altar. You wouldn't need elaborate ceremonies or ancient symbols or 20 years of planning. She gestured to the obsidian surface with its hungry carvings. You're afraid, Julian Vance. Afraid that time is running out, that whatever bargain you made to extend your life is coming due. The silence stretched between them like a blade, and for the first time since entering the hall, Nia saw uncertainty flicker behind Julian's predatory smile. She pressed her advantage with the desperation of someone walking a tightrope over an abyss. I know things about the federal investigation into your operations. My father wasn't just a thief, he was gathering evidence for the marshals. Bank records, shipping manifests, communications with your network. Kill me now, and that information gets released automatically. The lie tasted like copper on her tongue, but she delivered it with the conviction of absolute truth. But spare me, and I can tell you exactly what they know and when they plan to move. Julian studied her for a long moment, his ageless eyes weighing possibilities and probabilities. Finally, he smiled, an expression that held both genuine admiration and terrible promise. You have 1 week to prove your usefulness, my dear. After that, he gestured to the altar. The ritual can wait a few more days. Behind them, the triplets stood frozen in their failure, love and duty warring in their identical faces like a beautiful, broken chorus of damnation. The penthouse felt different when they returned, the same marble floors, the same floor-to-ceiling windows, the same expensive furniture arranged with museum precision, but now Nia walked across the threshold as something other than a victim. The triplets moved around her like satellites orbiting a dangerous star, their choreographed unity fractured by the weight of what had transpired in Julian's cathedral of horrors. She could feel their eyes tracking her every movement as she poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle they had never allowed her to touch before. The crystals sang against crystal as she set the bottle down with deliberate precision, the sound sharp enough to make Marcus flinch. Power, she was learning, had its own gravity. It bent everything around it, changed the fundamental physics of how people related to each other. 1 week, she said without turning around, letting the words hang in the air like incense. 7 days to convince your master that I'm worth more alive than dead. She took a slow sip of wine, savoring both the vintage and the silence that stretched behind her. I wonder what happens to his loyal dogs if I fail to perform adequately. Damien was the first to break, his carefully constructed composure cracking like ice under pressure. Nia, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Julian doesn't make idle threats. If you can't deliver on your promises. What? She turned to face them, and the raw anguish in their identical expressions might have moved her once. Now it felt like justice served cold. He'll kill me. Drain my blood on his little altar. Feed my soul to whatever ancient thing he's made a bargain with. She laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. I was already dead, Damien. You all made sure of that the moment you decided my life was worth less than your obedience. Adrian stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication that looked foreign on his proud face. We had no choice. You have to understand, Julian owns us completely. Our lives, our identities, even these faces we wear. Everything we are exists at his pleasure. And yet here I am, standing in his lair, sliding a blade between his ribs, and walking away breathing. Nia set down her wine glass and moved closer to them, noting how they instinctively retreated from her approach. Funny how impossible things become possible the moment someone decides to stop accepting impossibility. Marcus spoke last, his voice barely above a whisper. We love you. That was never a lie. Everything else was manipulation and coercion, but what we feel for you. Love? The word tasted like poison on her tongue. You handed me over to be butchered and called it love. You watched him explain how he planned to hollow out my soul and stood there like good little soldiers. She smiled, and it was Julian's smile, beautiful, cold, and utterly without mercy. But don't worry, boys. I understand love now. I understand how it can be used, shaped, weaponized. The triplets stood frozen in their shame, finally comprehending that the woman they had tried to sacrifice had learned to sacrifice pieces of herself in return, starting with forgiveness. 3 months later, the Palazzo Vance glittered like a jewel carved from old money and older sins, its ballroom filled with the kind of people who spoke in whispers and smiled with their mouths but never their eyes. Nia moved through the crowd like a queen among commoners, her black Valentino gown flowing around her like liquid shadow, every step calculated to project the perfect balance of elegance and menace that had become her signature in Julian's world. The federal investigation she had promised to deliver intelligence on had proven laughably inadequate, her father's evidence outdated, the marshal's office compromised by Julian's reach long before her capture. But by the time Julian discovered the poverty of her offerings, Nia had made herself indispensable in ways far more valuable than mere information. She possessed something rarer than secrets in his empire, the ability to inspire genuine fear in people who thought themselves beyond intimidation. Tonight's gathering was a celebration of their latest acquisition, a shipping company whose previous owners had made the fatal mistake of refusing Julian's generous offer to purchase their business. Their bodies were feeding fish somewhere in the Atlantic, but their assets now flowed seamlessly into the Vance portfolio. Efficiency through persuasion, as Julian liked to call it. Ms. Chen, Senator Morrison approached with the nervous energy of a man who owed more than he could repay. His wife clung to his arm like a life preserver, her diamonds catching the chandelier light with desperate brilliance. How lovely to see you again. I trust everything went smoothly with the Harbor Authority inspections? Remarkably so, Nia replied, her smile sharp enough to cut crystal. It's amazing how cooperative people become when they understand the consequences of obstruction. She tilted her head with mock consideration. Your vote on the Maritime Commerce Bill is scheduled for next week, isn't it? I do hope you'll remember our conversation about the importance of streamlined regulations. The senator's face went pale beneath his artificial tan. Of course, of course. Always happy to support legitimate business interests. He pulled his wife away with unseemly haste, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Julian materialized beside her with the silent grace that still made seasoned killers nervous. You've developed quite the talent for motivation, he observed, genuine admiration coloring his voice. I confess, when you first threatened me with that delightfully inadequate blade, I expected you to break within days. Instead, you've become one of my most effective assets. Survival requires adaptation, Nia replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter without breaking eye contact. You taught me that. Indeed I did. Though I suspect the lesson cost more than either of us anticipated. Julian's gaze drifted across the ballroom to where three identical figures moved through the crowd with the precise choreography of professional servants. The triplets had been reassigned after her transformation from victim to ally, their emotional compromise rendering them unsuitable for positions requiring objective judgment. Tonight they served as her personal attendants, a role that required them to anticipate her needs while maintaining the invisible presence of well-trained staff. It was Julian's idea of poetry, the men who had once held her captive now bound to serve her every whim, love transformed into a more exquisite form of torture. Marcus appeared at her elbow with perfect timing, refilling her champagne before she had consciously registered the glass was empty. His fingers brushed hers for the briefest moment, a contact so fleeting it might have been accidental to any observer. But Nia felt the tremor in his touch, the desperate communication of a man drowning in his own complicity. Thank you, she said without looking at him, her voice carrying the distant politeness reserved for hired help. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. She could see him flinch in her peripheral vision, could practically taste the anguish radiating from his carefully controlled posture. Damien moved past them carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, his path calculated to avoid any unnecessary interaction while remaining within earshot of her conversations. Intelligence gathering through domestic servitude, another of Julian's elaborate cruelties. They were forced to listen as she discussed business that would have once horrified them, operations they would have died to prevent, all while maintaining the practiced invisibility of well-trained servants. Adrian stationed himself by the ballroom's main entrance, his role to monitor arrivals and departures while ensuring Nia's security. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The men who had once delivered her to slaughter now stood ready to kill anyone who threatened her safety. Love, she had learned, could be alchemized into protection just as easily as betrayal. They're suffering beautifully, Julian murmured, following her gaze to where the triplets maintained their vigil. I do believe they would prefer the altar to this particular arrangement. Death, after all, offers the mercy of finality. Good, Nia replied, the word dropping from her lips like a stone into still water. They earned this suffering. All of it. Julian laughed, the sound bright as breaking bells. My dear, you've become quite the artist of retribution. I'm genuinely curious to see what masterpiece you'll create next. As the evening wore on and the powerful danced their elaborate ballet of corruption and compromise, Nia stood at the center of it all like a dark star, beautiful, unreachable, and utterly without mercy. The victim was gone, sacrificed on the altar of necessity. What remained was something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. Something that had learned to transform love into the most exquisite weapon of all.